The movie begins with a brutal man sitting at a table, lining up 3 shot glasses in front of him. One stays empty, the second holds a single bullet, and the third has 2. He starts naming the fallen soldiers he fought alongside, counting down until he reaches the last name. The final tally lands on the glass with 2 bullets. Without hesitation, he downs the whiskey from that glass, then loads the bullets into his revolver. This time, it's a 1 in 3 chance in Russian roulette. He pulls the trigger, just a click, no bullet. Whether that's luck or punishment, he's not sure. Later that day, Chapman heads to a liquor store to restock. Just as he's browsing the shelves, 2 armed robbers storm in. Without a flicker of fear, he steps right into their path. Calmly, he tells them not to aim for the stomach. It's a slow, messy way to go. He grips the barrel of one gun and dares them to aim for the chest or the head instead.
Crazy. No, crazy, man. Patient. Come on.
The gunman hesitates. That moment is all Chapman needs. In a flash, he takes down one robber, then the other. But as they hit the ground, his mind isn't in the store anymore. The memories of war come rushing back, drowning him in their weight. That night, sleep is impossible. The flashbacks hit like a freight train. He tries to drown them out with brutal training, but it's not enough. His frustration boils over and he pounds his fists into the wall until his knuckles are raw. Morning comes, but Chapman isn't in any shape to face the day. Hungover and barely functioning, he's jolted awake by someone hammering at his door. It's his sister Cindy, the sister he completely forgot to pick up from the airport. She's not shocked to find him in this state. Cindy tells him she's only in town for a couple of days for a friend's wedding before heading back to Brazil. She's been working there in dangerous neighborhoods trying to make a difference through charity work. Chapman hates the idea, but arguing with her is useless. Before leaving, Cindy checks his medication, the ones that are supposed to help him cope. Turns out, he swapped them for breath mints. Shaking her head, she leaves, and for a while, everything seems normal. But after some time, 2 Brazilian cops, Catarina and Paulo, find Cindy barely clinging to life on a beach. The brutal attack makes headlines, reaching the U.S. Embassy and, eventually, Chapman himself. He doesn't waste a second. He's on the first flight to Rio de Janeiro. Meanwhile, Detective Tiago Santo and his partner Carlo Baroro are deep in the favelas, hunting down armed smugglers. They're in the middle of an arrest when Catarina and Paulo show up following a different trail, one that might lead to whoever attacked Cindy. Catarina doesn't approve of Santo's brutal methods. She calls him out for operating outside his jurisdiction and roughing up suspects. But Santo doesn't take criticism well. Instead of explaining himself, he tries to intimidate her. He accuses her of being too soft on the locals, blaming her for the rampant crime in their district. Crime that nearly led to the death of an American citizen. Before he can finish his tirade, a rock flies through the air, smacking him in the back. Tension skyrockets. Both cops and locals instinctively reach for their weapons, ready to turn the place into a war zone. Realizing they're outnumbered, Santo backs off and makes an offer.
Your best fighter? Against mine.
He challenges the strongest capoeira fighter among the locals, pitting him against his own partner Baroro. If Baroro loses, the cops leave without making any arrests. The fight begins, but the outcome is never in doubt. The massive cop dodges kicks with surprising agility, flips through the air, and knocks his opponent out cold. Santo laughs, loudly declaring that he and his men will return whenever they please. As he and his team leave, the locals glare at them with pure hatred. Meanwhile, Chapman lands in Brazil, greeted by U.S. Ambassador Manny Ridley, a fellow veteran and an old friend. Together, they visit the hospital, where Chapman sees Cindy in a coma. The sight of her, pale and lifeless, drags him back into his past. The memories of war flood in, piles of bodies, blood-stained sand, the deafening silence after gunfire. Before he can fully process it, Santo walks in.
Crime in the favela is very terrible.
Manny introduces him as the lead detective on the case. He urges Chapman to stay calm and let the police handle things. Santo wastes no time, making his stance clear. He tells Chapman that the favelas aren't a place for sightseeing. On the way to the crime scene, the 2 men exchange bleak worldviews. Santo talks about how kids here grow up to be the next generation of criminals. Chapman sees war everywhere, even in places where it isn't being fought. Both agree on one thing: the world is a cruel, unforgiving place. Arriving at the favelas, Chapman meets Catarina again. But just as she starts explaining the situation, a loud bang echoes through the air. His instincts kick in. Before he even thinks, his hand grabs Catarina's holstered gun. Turns out, it was just the backfire of an old truck.
Chapman, My sidearm, please.
Santo watches the veteran with caution. He tells Katerina to keep an eye on their American guest. As she leads Chapman through the streets, she paints a grim picture of life here. Clinics and schools, they aren't funded by the government anymore. Drug cartels pay the salaries. That's why the locals protect criminals. If they don't, they risk losing what little stability they have. For Katerina, this makes every move as a cop dangerous. One wrong decision could spark a massacre. Back at the hospital, Cindy's condition suddenly worsens. Chapman, who was sitting with her, rushes to call a nurse, but something is wrong. A few minutes earlier, a woman disguised as a doctor had been in Cindy's room. Now, Cindy's life support machines are unplugged. Someone tried to finish the job. Enraged, Chapman demands a police presence at Cindy's bedside 24/7. Then, he heads straight into the favelas, looking for answers. He tracks down a street kid named Kuka, the same one he saw near the beach where Cindy was found. As soon as Chapman sees the necklace around the kid's neck, his blood boils. It belonged to Cindy. He grabs Kuka, demanding answers. Kuka and his friends charge at Chapman, but they are no match for a seasoned Marine. The fight is over in seconds. Desperate, Kuka pulls a knife, but Chapman expertly disarms him, turning the blade back on the kid. The threat is real, but the language barrier keeps them from understanding each other. Just in time, Katerina arrives and diffuses the situation. She explains that Cindy had worked closely with Kuka's family. His sister, Maria, was also a victim. She vanished without a trace. The necklace, it wasn't stolen. It was a gift, a symbol of friendship between Cindy and Maria. Realizing his mistake, Chapman eases up, and Kuka hands over Cindy's notebook. But something is off. Many pages have been ripped out. Flipping through the notebook, Chapman finds a contact, a photographer Cindy had recently worked with. Wasting no time, he calls and arranges a meeting at a cafe. The photographer reveals that Cindy had hired him for a project documenting the harsh lives of children in the favelas. But there was something else. She had been digging into the disappearances of girls, ones who worked the streets at night. The photographer suspects this investigation put her in danger. Cindy also asked him to secretly photograph her meeting with an informant. According to him, she took all the photos, leaving nothing behind. Chapman thanks the man, embracing him before slipping a flash drive from his pocket. As the photographer walks to his car, an explosion rips through the air. The vehicle erupts into flames, killing him instantly and injuring several bystanders. The shock sends Chapman into a spiral of war flashbacks. But in the chaos, something catches his eye. The same woman who had tried to kill Cindy in the hospital. Without hesitation, he takes off after her. Just as he turns a corner, a black SUV screeches into view. Gunmen armed with automatic weapons open fire. Chapman barely dodges the bullets, diving for cover. Nearby, a security guard lies lifeless, an innocent casualty of the attack. Chapman grabs the fallen man's gun and returns fire, taking out a few of the assailants and forcing the others to flee. Later, in Ridley's office, Chapman recounts the ambush. He mentions the strange tattoos on the attackers' arms, suspecting they were members of the Japanese underworld. The woman he chased also had an unmistakably Eastern appearance. They plug in the stolen flash drive. Among the photos, one stands out. Cindy captured a man outside a nightclub. Ridley immediately recognizes the location and drives Chapman there.
Oh, that's a local nightclub. I know where that is.
Inside the club, Chapman keeps a low profile, tracking the man from the photo. He follows him into the restroom and wastes no time. Within seconds, he has the guy pinned, his documents ripped from his hands. The man breaks under pressure, giving up the address of a high-profile client who might be linked to Cindy's attack. The next day, Chapman and Ridley head to their new target, a lavish villa, a playground for the rich and powerful. Meanwhile, across the city, Santo and his unit prepare for a brutal raid on drug traffickers in the favelas. Santo coldly declares that there will be no mercy and orders his team to eliminate everyone in their path. Before the operation, he kneels and mutters a prayer, his version of making peace before unleashing hell.
Put them in the ground!
Moments later, his team storms the area. There are no arrests, just bodies hitting the ground. At the villa, Chapman's arrival doesn't go unnoticed. A call is made to a woman upstairs. His presence is reported to an elegant but deadly-looking Asian woman counting stacks of cash. She barely reacts, instructing the guards not to bother the boss, Hiramoto. Chapman is escorted onto a balcony. Below, he spots a van pulling up. The doors open and young girls are led out. Among them, Maria, Kuka's missing sister. Before he can react, a garrote tightens around his throat. A guard tries to strangle him from behind, but Chapman isn't an easy target. He fights back, breaking free and knocking the man out cold. Slipping into the shadows, he follows the traffickers, keeping out of sight. The place is swarming with armed men. Japanese Yakuza, just as he suspected. Back in the favelas, the massacre continues. One of Santo's men spots a group of Yakuza in sleek black suits leading children toward a vehicle. Instinctively, he steps in to stop them. Santo, ever the manipulator, commends his officer for his bravery before casually drawing his gun and executing him on the spot. The Yakuza are free to go. With the situation handled, Santo makes a call to his employers. The woman on the other end assures him that his payment will be waiting at the port. Then she dials another number. Her boss, Hiramoto. There's a problem. The American is getting in the way, and it's time to eliminate him. As she relays this, Lemma, the man from the nightclub, stands before Hiramoto, awaiting judgment. The mistake of letting his documents fall into Chapman's hands was costly. One swift slice of a samurai sword later, and Lima is dead. Meanwhile, Chapman moves deeper into enemy territory. It doesn't take long for Hiramoto's men to spot him. He takes on 5 at once, using nothing but his fists and a stolen briefcase. But before he can finish, Santo and Bororo step in, guns aimed. They demand the briefcase. Gunfire alerts Katarina and her partner, who arrive just in time to disrupt whatever Santo had planned. Forced to maintain appearances, the corrupt detective plays along, following Chapman as he leads them to the room where the kidnapped girls were being held. But it's empty. The victims have already been moved. Frustrated, but undeterred, Chapman hands over the briefcase, knowing the documents inside link the Yakuza to human trafficking. Santo insists on taking the evidence into custody. It's only as Chapman turns to leave that the realization hits him. He never mentioned Lima's name. That means Santo already knew. Something clicks. Santo is in on it. Chapman immediately tells Katarina to check on Cindy at the hospital while he follows the detective. Hidden inside Santo's car, he watches as the man drives to the port. Meanwhile, Katarina arrives just in time, seconds before a hired assassin can finish what they started. The killer barely has time to react before Katarina takes them down. At the port, Chapman watches from the shadows. Santo stands with Yakuza associates as the kidnapped children are ushered into a storage warehouse, awaiting transport to Japan. It's all the confirmation he needs. Calling Ridley, he reports everything, but his old friend warns him against acting alone. Chapman doesn't listen. He never does. Using every bit of his military training, he moves unseen through the port, taking out guards one by one. His brutal efficiency turns the tide in his favor. But then, Santo. The two lock eyes, guns drawn. A firefight erupts, ending with Chapman pushing a forklift into the corrupt detective, pinning his leg. Before he can finish the job, Bororo blindsides him, knocking his weapon loose. The enforcer launches into a brutal capoeira attack, but Chapman fights smarter. Fancy flips and acrobatics don't mean much when raw power and precision take over. Santo frees himself from the wreckage and joins the fight. Still, even together, they struggle to take Chapman down. Then Hiramoto steps in, wielding his katana. The Yakuza boss moves with deadly grace, slicing Chapman's arm, forcing him on the defensive. Now, it's 3 against 1. Santo lunges with a knife, but in a swift counter, Chapman turns the blade back on him, driving it deep into Bororo's leg instead. A moment later, he knocks Santo unconscious with a brutal punch. Then, he rips the detective's chain from his neck and drives it into his chest, straight to the heart. Only Hiramoto remains. Chapman grabs 2 steel pipes, using them to block and redirect the sword's deadly slashes. He twists, locking the blade in place, directing it toward the Yakuza boss's throat. Just when it seems like he has the upper hand, Hiramoto's hidden blade flicks out from his sword's hilt, stabbing Chapman in the gut. That was a mistake. Fueled by sheer determination, Chapman channels his last reserves of strength, delivering bone-crushing blows to Hiramoto's skull until the crime lord collapses. Nearby, Santo, bleeding out, tosses Chapman a key. It unlocks a locker containing records of every corrupt official tied to the operation. Police, judges, even government figures. Santo, knowing his time is up, mutters that he did many terrible things. But Cindy wasn't one of them. As he takes his last breath, Hiramoto makes a final desperate move. Chapman doesn't hesitate. He empties several rounds into him, ending it once and for all. As he walks away, Chapman leaves a gun beside Santo's broken body, a final mercy. Ridley and the authorities arrive soon after. Chapman personally frees the kidnapped children. Cindy survives, but the damage is severe. She will need extensive medical treatment. Ridley offers to cover the costs on one condition. Chapman must work for him as an undercover operative. Ridley already knows the answer. Before he even accepts, Chapman is given a new identity. His old Marine call sign, Falcon.